The night the wildfire reached the edge of the city, everyone was running away. Sirens screamed through the hills, ash fell like black snow, and the sky glowed an angry orange as flames swallowed everything in their path. I should have been evacuating like everyone else. Instead, I pulled my truck to the side of the road and stepped into the smoke, because I heard a sound that didn't belong to the fire. It was faint, fragile, a cry that didn't match the chaos around it. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Smoke does that to people. Panic, too. But then I heard it again. Thinner this time, like it was running out of air. The sound was coming from an abandoned rest stop, long closed, its windows shattered and its parking lot cracked and overgrown. Fire trucks had already passed it. Everyone assumed it was empty. Everyone was wrong. I ran toward the building, coughing, my eyes burning. Flames were already licking the trees behind it. Inside, the heat was unbearable. The walls were scorched. The air tasted like metal and fear. And there, on the bathroom floor, wrapped in a fire blanket soaked with water, was a baby. Alive, barely. He was no more than a few weeks old. His skin was hot, his breathing shallow, his tiny fingers clenched as if holding on to life by instinct alone. Whoever left him there had tried to protect him, just enough to ease their conscience, not enough to save him. As I lifted him into my arms, the building groaned, the roof cracked, the fire was seconds away from reaching us. I ran. By the time I reached the road again, my lungs were on fire, my arms shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would tear itself apart. Firefighters rushed toward me, shouting, grabbing the baby, wrapping him in oxygen and blankets. "You just saved his life," one of them said. I didn't answer. Because in that moment, staring at the tiny face now streaked with soot and tears, I realized something terrifying. This child hadn't been forgotten. He had been hidden, and whoever left him there didn't expect anyone to come back. For most of my life, I believed I understood emergencies. I was a crisis management consultant, the kind of person corporations hired when everything was already falling apart. Fires, lawsuits, scandals, bankruptcies. I didn't put out flames with hoses. I put them out with contracts, silence, and carefully chosen truths. I knew how to stay calm when everyone else panicked. I knew how to walk away when things became inconvenient. That night, the wildfire was supposed to be just another problem I didn't have time for. I had been driving back from a closed-door meeting in the hills, one of those deals that leaves your hands clean and your conscience quietly bruised. The evacuation alerts started lighting up my phone one after another. Roads closing, neighborhoods burning, authorities urging everyone to leave immediately. I told myself the same thing I always did. This isn't your responsibility. I turned the radio down. I focused on the road, on getting out. But then came the sound. That cry followed me long after the fire trucks disappeared into the smoke, long after the baby was rushed into an ambulance, long after the flames were finally contained and the news cameras moved on to the next tragedy. Because saving him wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something I had spent years avoiding. The baby survived. Barely. Doctors said smoke inhalation had almost shut his lungs down. Dehydration, shock, exposure. If I'd arrived minutes later, they would have been signing a death certificate instead of filing paperwork. No one came forward to claim him. No frantic parents, no hospital bracelet, no missing child report that matched his description, just a nameless infant pulled from a place no one bothered to search. They called him John Doe in the records. Temporary, disposable, easy to forget. But I couldn't forget him. Something about the way he had been left, not abandoned in panic, but placed deliberately, gnawed at me. Whoever hit him at that rest stop hadn't been running from the fire. They'd been running from something else. I started asking questions, quiet ones, the kind I was used to asking for other people, never for myself. I learned the rest stop had been closed for years, that someone had been seen there days before the fire, that security cameras along the highway had conveniently malfunctioned the same night. Coincidences stack up differently when you know how systems fail on purpose. And then there was the woman, the volunteer nurse who refused to let the baby out of her sight. The one who flinched when I asked how long she'd been working emergency shifts near that area. The one who finally whispered, "You should stop digging. Some fires are meant to erase things." That was when I understood the truth. This wasn't about a natural disaster. It was about a decision, a choice someone made long before the flames ever reached the city. A choice to leave a child where no one would look and let circumstance finish the job. And the more I uncovered, the clearer it became that the trail didn't lead to strangers, drifters, or desperation. It led straight into a world I knew very well. Power, money, reputation. The same world I had spent my career protecting. By the time I realized that saving the baby meant destroying everything I believed about myself, it was already too late to turn back. Because once you run toward the fire, you don't get to pretend you didn't see what was burning inside it. I didn't plan to get involved. That's the lie I told myself during the first week after the fire. The same lie I'd told myself 100 times before in other crises. I convinced myself I was only checking on the baby out of basic human decency. A one-time visit. A loose end tied, nothing more. But when you've spent your life cleaning up other people's messes, you develop an instinct for rot. And something about this situation smelled wrong from the start. The hospital placed the baby in neonatal observation. A glass box filled with wires, quiet beeps, and controlled air. He was small, underweight, his chest rising with effort. They hadn't given him a real name yet. Just a temporary one scribbled on a plastic tag. I stood there longer than I should have. Long enough to notice the nurse who always seemed to be nearby. Long enough to realize she wasn't watching the baby. She was watching me. "Do you know who he is?" I finally asked her. She shook her head too quickly. "No." "Do you know who left him?" Another pause. Another shake. But fear leaves fingerprints, and I saw them all over her face. That was the moment my professional instincts kicked in, the ones I usually charged obscene amounts of money to use. I didn't confront her. I didn't push. I thanked her and left. Pressure works best when applied slowly. Over the next few days, I pulled records. Fire department reports, evacuation timelines, traffic camera logs. The rest stop hadn't been on any official evacuation route. It wasn't visible from the highway unless you knew where to look. Whoever placed the baby there wasn't panicking. They were precise. Even more unsettling was what wasn't there. No nearby footage, no witnesses who remembered faces, no overlapping emergency calls. It was as if the baby had been dropped into a blind spot carved intentionally out of chaos. That doesn't happen by accident. I requested access to restricted highway maintenance records, a privilege I had thanks to a long list of favors owed. The rest stop, I learned, had been scheduled for demolition 6 months earlier. Delayed due to budget reallocation. The same phrase used whenever someone powerful wanted time. Time to hide something. Or someone. Then came the phone call. A blocked number. Late at night. No greeting. "You should stop," a man said calmly. "You don't understand what you're touching." I recognized that tone instantly. Corporate, educated, confident. Someone used to being obeyed. "Who is this?" I asked. The line went dead. That was confirmation enough. People don't issue warnings unless they're afraid of what comes next. The baby's condition stabilized within days. The doctors said he was strong, resilient in a way that surprised them. That word stuck with me. Resilient. As if survival wasn't an accident but a decision his body had made. I found myself rearranging my schedule around hospital visits, sitting beside a child who had no idea how close he'd come to being erased. No memory of smoke, heat, or the silence that would have followed if no one had heard him cry. And the more time I spent there, the harder it became to see him as a case. He was a presence. A weight, a responsibility I hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. On the 5th day, a woman showed up at the hospital. She didn't approach the nurses. She didn't ask questions. She stood at the far end of the observation room, hands clenched in front of her, eyes locked on the baby. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. I watched her for a long time before speaking. "You're not family," I said quietly. She flinched but didn't deny it. "They told me I shouldn't come," she whispered. "Who told you?" Her jaw tightened. "People who don't want him found." That was the moment everything shifted. She introduced herself as Lena, a volunteer who'd been working food distribution near the evacuation zone before the fire. She said she'd seen a woman near the rest stop days before the disaster, pregnant, exhausted, terrified. "She wasn't running," Lena said. "She was waiting for someone, or something." Lena had reported it. The report vanished. "Just like everything else connected to this child. You're not the only one who heard him," she said, finally looking at me. "You're just the only one who didn't walk away." I didn't correct her, because deep down I knew the truth. I hadn't walked away yet, but if I kept going, I wouldn't be able to. And some fires, once you step into them, don't let you leave without burning something down. Lena didn't want to talk at first. She followed me out of the hospital and stopped beneath a flickering streetlight, arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if bracing herself against a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. "I've already said too much," she muttered. "That's usually how this kind of story starts," I replied, "and how people end up regretting their silence." She studied my face for a long moment, weighing something invisible. Finally, she exhaled. "The woman near the rest stop," she said. "She wasn't homeless. Not really." That alone was enough to tighten my chest. Lena explained that she'd seen her 3 times in the week before the fire, always at dusk, always alone, always watching the road like she was expecting someone who never came. She wore clean clothes, simple but decent, and carried a small backpack that never left her side. "She talked to the baby," Lena continued. "Not like someone saying goodbye, like someone asking for forgiveness. Forgiveness implies guilt or fear." "Did she say her name?" I asked. Lena shook her head. "But she said something else. She said, if he stays with me, they'll find him." That word echoed in my mind long after we parted ways. I couldn't stop thinking about the precision of it all. The timing, the location, the fire. Wildfires don't ask permission, but people exploit them. Chaos is the perfect camouflage. I requested access to social services intake records. No recent missing mothers matched the description. No anonymous birth reports. No shelters flagged a woman fleeing domestic abuse with a newborn. She hadn't asked for help. She had been hiding. That night, I returned to the hospital later than usual. The ward was quiet, the baby asleep, his tiny hand wrapped around the edge of a blanket like it was an anchor. I sat beside him and, without meaning to, rested my finger in his palm. He held on. That small, instinctive grip cracked something open in me. I had spent years believing attachment was a liability, that caring too much blurred judgment. Yet here I was, calculating risks not in numbers or reputational fallout, but in heartbeats. If I kept digging, I'd expose whoever had planned this. If I stopped, this child would disappear into a system designed to forget him. 2 days later, the pressure escalated. My office received an anonymous package. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, time-stamped, taken from a distance. It showed me entering the neonatal ward. On the back, written in neat, deliberate ink, were 4 words. "You were warned once." That wasn't intimidation. That was surveillance. I contacted a private investigator I trusted, one of the few who didn't ask questions he didn't want answers to. I gave him Lena's description and the rest stop's coordinates. "What are we looking for?" he asked. "A woman who knew she was being hunted," I said, "and someone powerful enough to make her vanish." 3 days later, he called. "I found something," he said quietly, "and you're not going to like it." The woman hadn't been living on the streets. She'd been staying in short-term rentals under false names, paid in cash, always near industrial zones, places people don't linger. More importantly, she'd once worked for a company I knew intimately, one I'd defended, one I'd buried scandals for. She'd been a junior analyst, smart, invisible, fired quietly after filing an internal ethics complaint that went nowhere, pregnant soon after. The complaint? Illegal disposal of hazardous waste, cover-ups, payoffs. She had threatened to go public, and then she disappeared. The realization hit me with a force no fire ever had. This wasn't just about a child. It was about erasing evidence. The baby wasn't collateral damage. He was leverage. I returned to the hospital and stood outside the ward, staring through the glass at a child who had no idea how close he'd come to being silenced before his first breath even settled into rhythm. A nurse approached me carefully. "Social services will be here tomorrow," she said. "They'll place him in foster care." Tomorrow. A deadline. I had one night to decide what kind of man I was willing to be. The consultant who followed protocol and slept well afterward. Or the one who crossed a line he'd spent his career guarding. I placed my hand against the glass. "I'm not letting them take you," I whispered. And for the first time since the fire, I understood something with terrifying clarity. If I protected this child, I would be declaring war on my own world, and there would be no safe way back. By sunrise, the decision had already been made. I didn't announce it. I didn't ask permission. I simply acted, the same way the people I'd protected for years always had. The difference was motive. This time, I wasn't covering something up. I was pulling it into the light. I filed an emergency petition to delay the baby's placement, citing incomplete evidence related to an ongoing criminal investigation. It was a legal maneuver I knew well, one I'd once used to stall lawsuits long enough for them to die quietly. Within hours, the phone calls started. Board members, former clients, a senator's chief of staff, people who never called unless they wanted something buried or someone silenced. "You're overstepping," one of them warned. "You're confused," another said, like they were correcting a child. And then came the message I'd been waiting for. A meeting request, private, immediate. The building was one of those glass and steel towers designed to look transparent while hiding everything that mattered. I'd been there dozens of times before, always on the right side of the table. This time the room felt smaller. 3 men waited for me. All familiar, all powerful, all wearing the same calm expressions that usually meant someone else's life was about to be rearranged. "You've made this complicated," the man in the center said. "I didn't," I replied. "You did. When you decided a baby was a liability." Silence followed. Not shock, but calculation. One of them leaned forward. "You don't understand how fragile systems are. One wrong move and thousands of people suffer." "That's the lie," I said evenly. "Systems don't break when the truth comes out. They break when Rod is protected." They exchanged glances, the kind that doesn't need words. "You're emotionally compromised," another said. "That child isn't your responsibility." I stood. "Neither was the woman you silenced. But you made that decision too." That was when the mask slipped. "You think you're saving him," the man in the center said quietly. "You're not. You're choosing him over everything you built." I didn't hesitate. "Yes." The meeting ended abruptly. By the time I returned home, my access to corporate servers had been revoked. My accounts were flagged for review. A legal notice waited in my inbox. Termination of consulting contracts, effective immediately. They weren't warning me anymore. They were isolating me. Lena called that night. Her voice was shaking. "They came to my apartment," she said. "Asked questions. Told me to forget what I saw." "Did you?" I asked. "No." "Good answer. Dangerous answer." I arranged for her to stay somewhere safe. The kind of place people like my former clients never bothered to look. I'd spent years learning their blind spots. Now I was using that knowledge against them. At the hospital, the baby stirred when I entered the room. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, but searching. I lifted him carefully, feeling the weight of him settle against my chest. "You don't know it yet," I murmured, "but you changed everything." A social worker arrived moments later, folder in hand. "Your petition bought time," she said. "But not much. Someone high up is pushing hard." "I know," I replied. "What are you planning to do?" I looked down at the child. "Tell the truth." That night, I sent files to an investigative journalist I trusted. Internal emails, financial trails, compliance reports that never made it past legal review. Enough to burn careers. Enough to explain why a pregnant whistleblower had been forced into hiding. Enough to prove the baby hadn't been abandoned. He'd been targeted. The article went live at dawn. By noon, it was everywhere. Headlines screamed about corporate corruption, environmental crimes, intimidation. Questions surfaced about missing witnesses, about a woman last seen near a wildfire evacuation zone. By evening, I was served papers. Civil suits, criminal inquiries, a petition challenging my temporary guardianship request. They were coming for me the way they always did, through pressure, exhaustion, fear. But something unexpected happened. People started calling. Former employees, junior analysts, assistants who'd signed NDAs and swallowed guilt for years. They had documents, stories, proof. The fire hadn't destroyed the evidence. It had exposed it. That night, as rain began to fall softly outside the hospital windows, I held the baby and realized something profound. I wasn't protecting him anymore. He was protecting me. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding behind contracts or strategy. I was standing where the flames had already passed. And whatever came next, prison, ruin, loss, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never hand him back to a world that tried to erase him before he could speak. The truth doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, documents, testimonies, half-forgotten emails dragged into the light by people who finally feel safe enough to speak. What began as a single article turned into a flood. Investigations opened. Executives resigned. Companies released statements filled with carefully empty apologies. And somewhere beneath all of it, a woman's name surfaced. Her real name. Not the aliases she'd used to stay hidden, but the one she'd been born with. The one she'd almost taken to the grave. Her name was Rachel Moore. She had been 28 years old, brilliant, quiet, the kind of employee who noticed patterns others ignored and assumed integrity still meant something. Her ethics complaint hadn't just threatened fines, it threatened prison sentences. When she discovered she was pregnant, she'd tried to leave, tried to disappear before they could pressure her into silence. But she'd underestimated how closely she was already being watched. Security footage recovered from a closed warehouse showed her arguing with two men days before the fire. No audio, just body language, fear, pleading. A hand pressed protectively against her stomach. The official report said she'd fled on her own. The unofficial truth was far uglier. Rachel had been given a choice. Sign a retraction. Accept a settlement. Give up the baby for its own protection. She refused. What followed wasn't murder in the way courts like to define it. It was abandonment with intent. They cut off her access to money, flagged her ID, pressured landlords, closed doors until only one path remained: hide, protect the child, and hope the world didn't look too closely. The fire had forced her hand. On the night the evacuation orders went out, Rachel had nowhere left to run. She'd chosen the rest stop because it sat inside a dead zone, off-grid, forgotten, surrounded by brush no one maintained. She believed the fire would draw responders close enough for someone to hear him. She believed wrong, except for one thing. I read her final statement late one night, alone in my kitchen, the house silent around me. It wasn't a letter. It was a recorded message, buried on an encrypted drive that surfaced weeks after the investigation began. Her voice was steady, tired, determined. "If you're hearing this," she said, "then I failed to protect him myself. But I didn't fail him completely. I placed him where someone would have to choose, where walking away wouldn't be easy." I stopped the recording, because I knew exactly what she meant. The hearings dragged on for months. I testified. So did Lena. So did others who'd been waiting years for a moment like this. The men from that glass tower sat stone-faced as their own words were read back to them under oath. I lost contracts, assets, friends who preferred silence over truth. But the case against me never held, because intent matters, and mine was written in ash and smoke and a cry no one else answered. The baby, now officially named Eli, stayed with me under temporary guardianship, long enough for routines to form, long enough for him to recognize my voice, long enough for my house to stop feeling like a place designed for one person and start feeling alive. Sometimes late at night I imagined Rachel watching, not with regret but with relief. She hadn't abandoned her son. She had entrusted him to a stranger who couldn't look away. The day the final ruling came down, rain fell again. Lighter this time, steady, almost gentle. I stood by the window holding Eli, watching the city move forward as if nothing had happened. But everything had. The system she'd challenged would never be the same. Neither would I. Because once you carry the weight of someone else's survival, you don't get to go back to being untouched. You don't get to pretend comfort is more important than courage. The fire had taken many things from many people, but it had left behind one undeniable truth. Some lives survive not because the world is kind, but because one person decides not to be cruel. The hardest part wasn't the investigations. It wasn't the court hearings, the reporters outside my gate, or the quiet betrayal of people who had once sworn loyalty. I was used to pressure, used to standing in rooms where decisions ruined lives with a single signature. The hardest part was the waiting. Every day, I woke up knowing that Eli could be taken from me with one phone call, one ruling, one technicality buried inside language designed to sound neutral while cutting deep. Temporary guardianship is a fragile thing. It doesn't belong to you. It can be revoked without warning. And the people who wanted him gone were patient. They didn't threaten me anymore. They didn't call. They didn't send warnings. They waited. One evening, as dusk bled into night, my attorney arrived unannounced. He didn't sit down. He didn't offer pleasantries. "They're shifting strategy," he said. "They're not going after you directly." I felt my chest tighten. "Then who?" "The child." Those two words landed heavier than any accusation ever had. He explained it carefully, clinically. They were arguing that Eli's existence was tied to an ongoing criminal case, that keeping him with me represented a conflict of interest, that placing him into state custody would be the safest option. Safe, the same word they'd used when they left his mother with nowhere to go. "If they succeed," my attorney continued, "you won't lose him forever. But you'll lose control. You won't decide where he goes, who raises him, what story he grows up believing." After he left, the house felt impossibly quiet. Eli slept in the next room, unaware that his future was being debated by people who had never held him, never heard his breathing slow when he felt safe. I walked into his room and sat beside the crib, watching his chest rise and fall. "You didn't ask for this," I whispered. "None of it." That night, I understood the final truth Rachel had known before me. Protecting him didn't mean fighting forever. It meant choosing when to stop running. The next morning, I made a decision that shocked everyone, but including myself. I offered a deal. Not to the board, not to the prosecutors, to the public. I agreed to step fully out of my former industry. No consulting, no advisory roles, no quiet influence behind closed doors. I would place my remaining assets into a blind trust, remove myself from decision-making power, and testify openly. Not just about this case, but about others I had buried over the years. In return, I demanded one thing: legal recognition that Eli was not evidence, that he was a child, a human being, not leverage. The backlash was immediate. Former allies called me reckless, naive, emotional. They were right about one thing: I was emotional. But emotion, I learned, is what separates protection from possession. Weeks passed before the response came. During that time, I lived in a kind of suspended reality, cooking meals, reading bedtime stories, attending hearings by day, and building block towers by night. Two worlds colliding inside the same hours. Then one afternoon, my lawyer called. They accepted. The condition was simple and brutal. Once the ruling was finalized, there would be no return to my old life, no back doors, no influence to reclaim. I looked at Eli, playing on the floor, laughing at nothing in particular. "I already left," I said. The night before the final ruling, rain fell again. I stood by the window, watching it trace slow lines down the glass, thinking about fire and water and the strange symmetry of it all. Destruction followed by cleansing. Loss followed by possibility. Rachel had stood in the rain once, too, believing someone would choose. Tomorrow, the world would decide whether I deserved to keep that choice. I didn't pray for victory. I prayed for clarity, because whatever happened next, I knew this: some choices don't save your reputation. They save your soul. And as dawn approached, soft and gray, I felt something I hadn't felt since the night of the fire. Peace. The court documents arrived on an ordinary morning. No sirens, no headlines, no crowds waiting outside my door. Just a thin envelope placed carefully on the table, as if the world had learned to handle truth more gently now. I opened it with Eli balanced on my hip, his fingers tangled in my sleeve, his weight familiar in a way nothing else in my life ever had been. The words were formal, restrained, legal language doing its best to sound impartial. Permanent guardianship granted. I sat down slowly, the breath leaving my chest like I'd been holding it for months without realizing. Eli laughed, unaware that something enormous had just settled into place. The house had changed in ways no renovation ever could. Toys lay scattered where briefcases once rested. Morning light filled rooms that used to stay dark long after sunrise. I learned the rhythm of feedings, fevers, and first steps. Lessons no boardroom ever taught me. Sometimes people asked if I regretted it. The career I'd dismantled, the influence I'd surrendered, the version of myself that once moved through the world untouchable. I never answered directly. Because how do you explain that losing power felt like gaining gravity? That for the first time my life had weight? I took Eli to the rest stop once. Not out of morbid curiosity, but because I needed to see it again. without smoke, without fear. The building was gone now, cleared after the investigation. Wildflowers had pushed through the scorched earth, stubborn and bright. I stood there holding him, listening to the wind move through the hills. "She trusted someone," I whispered. "She trusted the world to send one person who wouldn't walk away." Eli reached toward the flowers, laughing, alive. That was the answer. Lena visited often. She never asked for credit, never spoke about courage like it was something she owned. She simply showed up, the way she always had, steady, present, unafraid of truth. One afternoon, as rain began to fall softly, she watched Eli splash in a puddle and said, "You know, not everyone runs from fire. Some people are shaped by it." I thought of Rachel then, of a woman who chose hope over safety, who believed that somewhere someone would hear what the flames tried to hide. The world never apologized to her, but it didn't forget her either. Years passed quietly. The scandals faded. The companies rebuilt under new names. Systems changed slowly. Not enough, never enough, but enough that her sacrifice hadn't been meaningless. Eli grew strong, curious, fearless in the way only children who were loved from the beginning can be, even if they don't remember it. On the anniversary of the fire, rain came again. Not the violent kind, just enough to cool the air, to soften the ground. Eli stood beside me on the porch, his small hand in mine. "Did the fire hurt you?" he asked. I knelt so we were eye to eye. "No," I said. "It taught me how to protect what matters." He nodded, satisfied, then ran back into the house, into a life that almost didn't exist. As I watched him go, I understood something I'd missed for most of my life. Some people build empires, others save lives. And sometimes, if you're willing to walk into the fire when everyone else runs away, you get the chance to do both. Not with power, not with money, but with love that refuses to let go. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. The fire was long gone, and in the quiet it left behind, something far greater had taken its place. A beginning.